long play for them is when we get this guy figured out, y'all are going to see this guy's got the goods. We've just got to mold. We got to take this lump of clay and mold it into something special. Welcome into the Hot Read podcast for Monday, August the 12th. I'm your host, Easton, Director of Published Content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network. You can follow me on social media at Easton Freeze. I'm joined today, as always, by producer JT. JT, we are back for the foreseeable future to 3 show weeks. How are you, my friend?
Not only are we back to, I'm good by the way, but not only are we back to 3 show weeks, as D Good points out in the comments here, we're early, and it seems like he also says that I've lit a fire under your ass today. Well, it's because I think, you look at your background. Did I maybe put you in a solitary confinement space?
I mean, JT's
room?
basement. Our address is no.
You're in my basement now, and I'm forcing you to be early all the time.
That's right. I don't get my meals delivered to me if I am not on time or early in JT's basement. No, I mean, here's the thing. Actually, we're on time because it's a 5-minute countdown to the show. The show is supposed to begin at 4. So really, we've just never been on time until today. But today we're on time, and we are, like I said, back to 3 show weeks. Now that we've got games to react to, the Monday, Wednesday, Friday nature of our podcast is back, which means we'll be live on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays in the afternoon. Not Sundays, sometimes in the evening. Like if the Titans play on Sunday at noon, that Sunday evening is when we go live, obviously. But then around this 4 o'clock window, our typical time on Tuesdays and Thursdays still. And JT, the Titans' first preseason action, you and I both in attendance last night. I guess I should address where I actually am, by the way. I'm not in JT's basement. I'm at my grandparents' house. I'm in Knoxville. Decided to take off, and you have a baby, and then you have to do like the family and extended family tour. Like it's like, when a president has to like tour around the country when they win to like shake the hands and kiss the babies, you have to take your baby to be kissed by all the family members when you have them. And so she's meeting great grandparent number 2 and number 3. That would be all 3 on my side that are still around. And so finishing the family tour today here in Knoxville, seeing a lot of family, having a good time. She met her first friend her age, by the way, because my first cousin, had her baby the day before we had our baby. It was kind of a thing at the time because we didn't want to share the same birthday. Like that's lame. It's like, so it was okay. You're going to have her on Tuesday, Kate, my cousin. We have to hold off until Wednesday. We did until Wednesday at 1 a.m. So we were an hour across the finish line there. And so those two met. It wasn't cool. It wasn't as cool as you thought it might be. They just kind of looked at each other. They can't, infants can't really see very well at all. So they don't probably even know each other exists yet. And then there's the whole object permanence thing. So one day they'll be friends, I'm sure. But little Valerie and little Zeke got to meet tonight, and that was cool. But I'm still here, and we will be talking about all the things that happened in the Titans preseason opener. Got the dub, by the way, which is the least important element of all of this. They did, in fact, win the game. I find myself, JT, the longer I do this as a job, the less interested I am in the wins and losses in general. And that's not to say that the wins and losses during the season, I don't care. But even in a win or a loss during the season, I am just as much, if not more, interested in like what the narrative is, what the storyline is, what the content element of this is, because that's how my brain now functions. In the preseason, brother, I couldn't care any less who wins the game. It was bizarre to me sitting in the stands for a portion of last night's game, and like fans are cheering. It's like, 2 minutes left on the clock. Let's go. Let's drive down. And they care about winning and losing, which I respect the heck out of. Don't get me wrong. And as Coach Callahan said in his press conference at the end of the game, winning still matters, even when it doesn't count. It's about a winning culture. So there's something to that. But it is funny in the preseason that if you win, it's about a winning culture. And if you lose, it's just the preseason. Who cares, right? So we're going to be breaking down all the winners and losers. We are back to segment season here on the show. We've got a little bit of a warm-up segment for you today. The warm-up is back. I've got a thought here on the topic to get us started. And then, of course, JT and I will go through our winners and losers from this game, whose stock rose, whose stock fell, and then a little bit of Titans news before we get you out of here on a Sunday afternoon. Before we get to any of that, a little bit of housekeeping. If you're with us live today, we appreciate you being here. Do us a couple of favors. Make sure you're watching on Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page. That's Broadway Sports Media on YouTube. Find this live stream there. And in the comment section, you can join Paul and D-Good and Chef Ran and Poipel Neupel is a new one. Welcome in Poipel Neupel to the chat. We appreciate all of you guys being here with us. And we want to hear your thoughts as well. Your thoughts, questions, comments, queries on what exactly went down Saturday night in the Titans win over the 49ers. While you're there, make sure you're liking, make sure you're subscribing, doing all of those things. And I have one more thing, but I'm going to hold off. There's one more bit of news, but we'll get to it in the news section of today's show. If you are an enjoyer of the Tennessee Titans and you live in Nashville and you're familiar with what we did last week, you might want to stick around for a little bit of an announcement at the end of the show. But with that, JT, let's get kicked off here with the warm-up. And here's my thought that was born from last night's game. It was something that I was kind of wrestling with in my mind in the Titans press box. And I kind of came to this conclusion today. This may not be the best way of framing it, but a lot of what Brian Callahan and this new coaching staff has done to reinvigorate this relatively new team, to bring a new energy, to bring a positive vibe. We've been hearing from these players all offseason long about how there's just this good energy, these good vibes. It feels like a really positive place at the Titans facility and like a team that is heading definitively in the right direction. And that's a hard thing to pin down, right? That's very much an ethereal concept. And you can feel it when you're there. But for those of us trying to convey that to you all on a podcast or on a video show, or frankly, just in person when you're not there, it's hard to do. And last night, watching how Brian Callahan handled his first preseason game as a head coach, combining that with what we've seen from him at practice, at training camp so far, what I think it boils down to for me, and this is certainly not all of it, but I think it's a big part of what the players are feeling. A lot of what Brian Callahan does is a KISS principle. Well, you've heard keep it simple, stupid, very common saying. And it's hard to come on the show and really praise a very highly paid NFL head coach for doing the simple things, because it's like, hooray, congrats, you did the easy thing. What do you want? A sticker, a cookie? What should we give you for that? And yet, in the NFL, how often do we as fans look at teams, look at coaches, look at GMs, and beg them to just do the obvious thing, and they make things harder than they need to be for no reason, relatively often, right? And with the Titans of the recent past in particular, there are a number of things that feel refreshing about the way Brian Callahan has been handling his operation that I think you can point to after this preseason game, right? You think back to around this time last year, Mike Vrabel and company talking about, hey, we're going to get some starters in there to play in the preseason. You're going to want to tune into this game because they're going to get some snaps here at the top of the game. And Ryan Tannehill gets in there on a single drive. It's a 3-and-out. They hand the ball off 3 times. He does not even attempt to pass. They punt, and then he puts on the gym shorts. He's done for the day. He puts on the bucket hat. Not exactly what you're looking for. Not exactly accomplishing anything besides maybe getting some butts in seats, I guess, selling some tickets. You flash forward to this year, and Brian Callahan, sure. Yeah, we'll get the guys a couple of we'll give the offense 14. The starter's going to get 14 snaps. Defense is going to end up getting about 12 snaps. We're going to get them a couple of series each, get a couple of scores on the board, see a little bit, get popped a little bit, feel the pads pop it and get in there and get the season started. It's not that hard. Let's just give the starters a couple of drives. It's really not that complicated. You think back to the previous regime, and whenever anything happened in practice, whether it was an injury, whether it was a skirmish, whether it was a suspension, any kind of drama, any kind of media relevant information that was going to come from the team, we sit in the press conference and we talk to Mike Vrabel, and he's not offering up that information. That's not going to be volunteered, right? You're going to have to pry for that. And even still, you're probably going to get a big fat non-answer and not so subtle FU in response. That's kind of the vibe of what you're getting back. With Brian Callahan, he comes to the podium each and every time and gives an address of all of the obvious things that we are going to ask about. Hey, this guy got hurt. Here's how long he's going to be out. Hey, this guy is dealing with something with the league right now that's pending, but here's what we can tell you so far. That stuff comes out at the top. He gives you a basic explanation. We cover those bases. There's a baseline level of respect with the amount of transparency he gives. It's not hard. Like, let's keep this simple. I'll give you the easy stuff. I'll respect you guys and we can move on. Right? You think about how last season, Mike Vrabel in the preseason, well, we're going to get these 2 backup quarterbacks that are fighting for the job. let's alternate them every other drive, every other 2 drives. Like, let's really get them back and forth in there, and make this, frankly, in my opinion, more complicated than it needs to be. This season, it's Brian Callahan. How are you going to handle this? Let's just give roughly one half to one of them and then roughly another half to the other one, so that they can maybe establish some rhythm and like put a couple of drives together in a row. We don't have to like do the mental math of, okay, well, Malik looked good on drives 1 and 3, and those were with the 2s, but then he was with the 3s, and then you have to take into consideration none of that math. Like, it's just these guys play with these guys for a half, and these guys play with these guys for a half, and judge them based on that quantity of tape that they've put out there. Not complicated. And then the final example I'll come up with is, I asked Brian Callahan about this last night. We're going to play this clip later in the show. Hey, Will Levis, and a lot of fans not crazy about this when it happened. One of those first couple of drives the Titans ran, Will Levis takes off, tries to get into the end zone. He told us afterwards he thought about doing the helicopter jump spin, which would have been dumb, don't get me wrong, but trying to jump over the guy, ends up dropping a shoulder, getting popped real good by a DB, by a linebacker, and he's fine, but it's not the kind of hit you necessarily want to see in the preseason for your young star quarterback. That's a scary thing for fans, no matter who the quarterback is. And yet I talked to Brian Callahan after the game, and he kind of agreed with me. My take at the time on Twitter was, I kind of like that. I kind of love that, actually. The quarterbacks have been wearing the red "Don't Touch Me" jerseys for months now. They've not felt any kind of heat, any kind of physicality. And for a guy that is as big and as rocked up as Will Levis, somebody that is as liable to take off running and lay a shoulder in a game the way that Will Levis is want to do and is capable of doing, you're going to need to get that somewhere, somehow. And is that better to come in the preseason where you can kind of get your feet wet, or is that going to be better, in the middle of the first quarter in Chicago when you are ankles, when you are nose deep in the waters of the NFL season already? I'd say let's get that out of the way now. Let's get that ball rolling. And that was essentially what Brian Callahan's take was, is, sometimes these guys just need to get the first pop. We don't want to take too many of them. Hopefully we've got that out of the way early and we don't have it happen again in the preseason, but I don't mind it. That's not something I'm going to have a talking to with him. Whereas with Mike Vrabel in the past couple of preseasons, it was, we don't want that. Had to have a conversation with him about that, protecting himself. Don't be dumb out there. Hey, if Malik Willis is out there running the ball instead of throwing the ball, we're going to yank him, even though this is the preseason when he should be out there getting the reps. We don't want that. We want you throwing the ball, running the play. We called Malik. This is a very rigid situation. Only last night, Malik Willis and Will Levis both take off running, big play. The most efficient play in the NFL, by the way, the quarterback scramble. Brian Callahan's take is, good play, fellas. Way to see the opening. Way to take the opportunity that you would have taken in the real game. Way to do the thing that you would have done in the first place. So what? We wanted to see you throw. We see you throw in practice. In the game, we want you to do what you would do in a game. It's not simple. Let's keep it simple, stupid. That's kind of where I've put my finger on, hey, this new regime, we talk about the difference in the vibe, the difference in the energy. I think they're just doing the simple things, which is, again, a low bar to clear, but it is an important one. And based on the recent history of the Tennessee Titans, it's one that feels refreshing because we haven't quite had it in a long time. Does that resonate at all with you, JT? Does that make any sense at all?
I think it does. For the most part, it's kind of this new age style of football that we've seen a lot of other teams kind of adapt. You look at teams like the Eagles, with what they do and how they process teams like the 49ers, which is where Rand came from, teams like the Rams. These are all teams who kind of process that similar way. And I think it really, you talk about the difference, right, being between Brian Callahan and Mike Vrabel. It's the fact that Vrabel comes from such a close-knit coaching tree of the Bill Belichick style. And it's an interesting conversation that we don't have to have today, but it's like, how much longer do you think, if either Mike Vrabel or Bill Belichick were to come back to coach, how much longer do you way of coaching and that message would resonate, right? Because it seems to me like when we talk about Brian Callahan and why the vibe is so high around here, it's the fact that, he doesn't bring that super, iron fist, closed grip kind of coaching style or, just leadership style. And I think that's something that's changing within the league. And I think it's really nice that this new regime under Rand Carthen is taking things that other teams have already stepped into and kind of forwarded the game in that aspects and brought it here. So I totally agree with you, especially with, I think, the drastic difference in how the preseason was attacked. I think the biggest thing that it was night and day last season from last season to here, was Malik Willis being able to be out there and not seeing them flip flop every single other drive. I think,
Right.
even though it didn't really produce much, the fact that it just being able to be out there for sustained drives, and still, Malik did end up playing a little bit with the second group offensive line. They sprinkled in a couple of receivers there as well. Hassan Haskins was playing with him for a little bit. They were sprinkling in kind of key skill position players throughout the game, no matter what. So it wasn't just necessarily like Malik was playing with only the threes and Mason was playing with the twos and vice versa. But Malik got a different share of personnel, I think. But that's good, right? It's who you've been comfortable with. And being able to get those live reps with the people you've been comfortable with throughout camp, I think, is the biggest thing. So that was a much needed change and something I really enjoyed.
I agree that the rapport you have with guys is maybe even more important than the quality of the talent. With the offensive line, that's one thing. And if you just simply can't protect the guy in the preseason, that's not fair to him. It's not a fair evaluation, totally. But we saw it on display last night. We're going to talk about some of these guys. Malik Willis and Bryce Oliver, that's not something that's new. That connection you saw between them, 2 or 3 completions last night, clearly they looked comfortable with one another, and that's because they have been comfortable with one another. He has been a favorite target of Malik Willis throughout camp. Those guys have a rapport. Just because, Calvin Ridley is a significantly better receiver than Bryce Oliver will ever be, does not mean that pairing him with Malik Willis is necessarily going to result in a better product out there. You've seen how much Will Levis has struggled getting the ball on time, on target to a Calvin Ridley. Different guys have different styles. You get to know them and you get to know their game, and you work together better. And so that's something that's important. We can go ahead and dive in, I think, here to the winners and losers. And let's just go ahead and start with Will Levis. JT, what was your overarching takeaway from this game when we talk about the starters in particular? Because we're going to kind of talk about this in 2 different phases, I think. The starters, which a very limited sample size, we saw a couple of drives. Any takeaways from that? Winners and losers, and then more importantly, the preseason winners and losers from the rest of the game, guys that are fighting for roster spots that helped or hurt their case. From the starters in particular, was there an overarching takeaway for you that you wanted to share here?
Yeah, well, first if we want to talk about Will Levis firstly here, I think my reaction to Will Levis was I was content with what I saw, really. I think there were a lot of things that we wanted to see from Will Levis in this first game and some real action against different looks that he hadn't seen in a long time. And I think we saw that from Will Levis. The ability and the difference in his processing, I think, was something that was what I wanted to see. His ability to, look off moves and then check down to both Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears is something that is a little bit different from last season. I think his ability to stand in the pocket, on that one, especially where the pocket was closing, and finding Calvin Ridley, who's able to get yards after the catch after that. I think that's also something that I really did enjoy seeing Will Levis. And then also, I kind of have come around on the idea that getting Will Levis running like that is something that you want to see, because it's kind of putting him into that mid-season NFL form. I was telling one of my other buddies who was asking me about Will Levis, you can't take the Josh Allen out of Will Levis. It's just an inevitability at this point. Like, that dude is going to continue to make just some plays where you think it's pretty dumb of him to do, but he's that ultra hyper competitiveness in him and his ability
He's got
to run.
some Leroy Jenkins in him. You're just never going to get out of him. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And so I think from what I saw, I was very content, and I thought the way that they were, play calling and everything wise, from that standpoint, I think I was really happy with.
Yeah. My overarching thought from this game from the starters was, it was largely boring. And like, when I say boring, that's not derogatory. What's the opposite? Boring, complimentary is the way I'm using that word. It was satisfactory, right? And with the offense in particular, I'm with you. I felt like Will Levis did a good job of finding the underneath route, going 1 to 2 to 3, getting through his reads. A big part of that is facilitated by the fact that, hey, the offensive line, the starters against the twos, so, massive grain of salt, but the offensive line held up, looked pretty good in limited capacity. Across the line, it wasn't even just, the left side looks really good and the right side is fine. they all looked pretty equally solid in their first outing, in my opinion. And we'll talk about those guys individually in a second. But for me, Will Levis was a winner in that capacity. Just that he did the right thing. It was a good mix of getting through his reads, taking a shot, taking the underneath route. And I liked what I saw in that regard. Something else that we can talk about with the starters, if we look to the other side of the ball, the defensive starting group, and I get that it was like really half starters and half backups because we're missing a number of key pieces, right? No Snead, no Woozy, no Jeffrey Simmons, no Harold Landry, a bunch of key, and none of the starting safeties. Well, no, Monty Hooker was out there, correct? Yeah, Monty was out there, but none of the rest of the starting safeties. And so it wasn't all the group that's used to playing together, but that opening drive was discouraging to me in the moment. They let the backup quarterback, backup running back, and a variation of 2s and 3s on the San Francisco roster march down the field pretty methodically, bit by bit, not even like a big play that just broke off and what are you going to do? No, they just took chunks out of you for the first, 5-6 minutes of the game, scored a touchdown. And not only did they allow a touchdown, but more importantly, they looked soft. They looked kind of lost. It was a strange thing to see in the moment. And then upon rewatch, you and I and Zach and Stoney were all talking about this last night. I got a chance to rewatch that opening drive today in the car, and I am less discouraged, more confused. A lot of the landmarks we were seeing defensively from that group were unfamiliar. It did not come off as anything really resembling what we've seen from the quote unquote real version of the Titans defense of this year in practice, the things that, they're running their actual plays in periods that we can't record. From what I've gotten used to seeing there and from what you've gotten used to seeing there at the facility, and then going back and watching the way they ran last night, it was very much soft, zone, not aggressive, extremely vanilla, which you expect, you expect that in the preseason, but even the identity of the defense, not just the complexity of the play call, but the identity was different from what we were expecting to see from this defense. So it resulted in a lot of guys, Jack Gibbons looking like he doesn't quite know where he's going, and then he's too shallow and allows an easy crossing route. There were a number of instances of guys that looked like they either didn't know what they were doing, or they were definitely not in the correct position, didn't get deep enough, playing too shallow. It was just weird. And it was largely the secondary. The front, Tavondre Sweat, who we can mention here in a second, was fine. He played 12 snaps. I believe he got doubled on 5 of those 12 snaps. So that's kind of a precursor to what you're going to see from Tavondre once Jeffrey Simmons gets in there. Somebody's getting doubled, and some of the times it's going to be Tavondre Sweat, which means congratulations, Jeffrey Simmons. You've just got one guy to beat. But that secondary was weird to me. Was that kind of your takeaway as well?
I think there's 2 ways to put it. One is definitely that, it looked a little bit strange. And I think that kind of coincides with the kind of personnel that they were throwing out there. Obviously, you had Jarvis Brownlee Jr. on the opposite side right there with Roger McCreary also playing the outside, because you didn't have Snead or Awuzie or really your outside guys, because we've talked about Roger McCreary most likely going to move to a kind of full-time slot position. So I think that's one thing. The other thing, it's not nothing that, watching the 2 guys that we were concerned could not really contribute in zone coverage last night, and Jack Gibbons and Kenneth Murray. So I look at both sides equally and waiting to see more from them. But I can't say fully that this was just a different look when our entire priors are kind of, in our notion of Jack Gibbons and Kenneth Murray can't really cover in zone coverage like that effectively.
Sure,
and then we see that happen. It's like, which side do you believe? I think that's one that we're going to have to continue to look at as we get deeper into the preseason.
So I agree with you that the inside linebackers are a unique case. And we're going to talk about the starting linebackers and the second and third string linebackers in particular in a second, because Derek in the comments says the Chance Campbell and Caleb Murphy combined sack was pretty aggressive. Let me be clear. When I say they were weird and not aggressive and seemed to not resemble the identity of the new Titans defense, I'm talking about just the first 2 drives with the starters, right? We're going to move on from that and talk about the rest of the game here in a second. With the starters, it was weird. But again, upon rewatch, it kind of confirmed that I think this is a very fishy preseason situation. I don't think it's resembling at all the way that they're going to operate on defense to begin the year. Now, maybe when they do what they're trying to do, like actually run the plays, maybe they're still bad. So I'm not saying that this, don't worry, they'll be good eventually, but it will look different eventually. And I think then you'll be able to correctly judge what's going on. Let's go ahead and play a couple of the clips we have, JT, and I've done a bad job here. I've got no notes. I'm free balling it with a laptop here in a bedroom. Will Levis did speak about his run, which we've already pasted over, but let's hear from him about his decision-making, trying to punch that one in.
You mean Brian Callahans' thoughts?
Oh, sorry. It's Brian. Yes, Brian Callahans' opinion on Will Levis trying to punch that one in. There we go. Roll the tape.
Something to that. Guy just taking a good shot early on and feeling like he's ready to play. All quarterbacks, I tell you, they like to get that first hit out of the way. So we got it out of the way early. Hopefully we don't take many more of them. But it was good. I didn't mind what he did. It wasn't really an egregious, put himself in real harm's way. But, yeah, I mean, the less hits, the better, obviously. Good out.
Okay, so there's that. This next one is Brian Callahans' opinion on what we've seen from T'Vondre Sweat so far. Let's hear what he has to say, and then I want to hear your thoughts, JT, on what we saw from T'Vondre in limited capacity.
From top to bottom, there was some good kind of all the way around, and there's plenty of things, that as you guys get to know.
Or this is the O-line question, and then we can get to T'Vondre Sweat after that. I think we should talk about the offensive line first, for sure.
Is the T'Vondre clip in here?
Yes.
Okay, well, fair. Okay, we're flying blind here, people. Bear with us. So this is the offensive line quote, JT?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Brian Callahans' evaluation of the starting offensive line, which we will have you listen to, and then we'll comment on that, and then we'll get to the T'Vondre clip.
And there's plenty of things, that as you guys get to know my dad, it's never ever good enough. But that's just the way it is, and they're going to keep getting coached. But I thought, from an overall perspective, I thought they went out and showed well for themselves as a unit. We opened up some holes in the run game. We only gave up one sack, and that was a quarterback's sack. So yeah, good start. I mean, there's not a lot of things there's a lot of detail that I could go into that are probably a little bit boring, but for the most part, I would say that it was a positive first start with plenty of room to grow.
All right,
I wish you would have gone
here a little bit, and we can talk about one thing at a time. The linemen, JT, what were your thoughts on the linemen last night?
Well, first of all, the first thing I would like to say is that I wish he would have gone into the nitty-gritty talking about them, because there were different things from each starting lineman last night that I think were, could be worked on, were pretty impressive. Let's kind of break this down into the three sections of the line, I think is the best way to talk about it for at least the starting line position. I think if you start on the left side, there were, I think JC Latham, his first real action as an NFL player, I think was very up and down, but that's not a bad thing. I think that's to be expected. Like we've been saying, it's like, he is a rookie. He's not going to come in there immediately and be, this all-star Pro Bowl level left tackle. Like there are going to be growing pains, but the growing pains weren't so egregious to the point where it seemed like it was a problem. There were a lot of times where you saw that strong anchor from JC and his ability to kind of set that edge that we wanted to see out of him and see if he could do on the opposite side that he played at Alabama. And I think he did that. There were a couple where, the edge rusher got the best of him, but I think that he really had a pretty decent showing last night, and I was very pleased with what he had to do.
And again, super limited capacity. So all of this, a grain of salt. Let's see a full game. But every issue that I had, the downs that we saw from him last night were largely technique things. It wasn't, oh man, he's just too big. Oh man, he's just not athletic enough. A lot of the base concerns people had coming out. Oh man, that looks like a guy that's not comfortable on the left side. The fundamental things people were knocking him for in the draft process, that didn't materialize. Well, first of all, it hasn't really materialized out of the practice field, but then under the bright lights also didn't materialize. It was technique just needs to be a little bit cleaner here. That's something that with his work ethic, his talent, the coaching that he has at his disposal, I trust he's going to get figured out. So I agree. He showed off his strength. There was the one play where Levis took off and ran, by the way, the one we keep talking about, that our buddy Sonny Keeley has a clip of that you should go watch on Twitter. There's a lot of guys that do interesting things. Like his recommendation on the tweet was watch this 4 times, watch Levis, then watch TK, then watch Skoronski, then watch NPF. They all do something interesting and different in this play. And with TK, with JC Latham, he has this outrageously strong outside arm where he doesn't have to set really wide despite the edge coming really wide. He just catches him with that outside arm and like Hulk smashes him into the ground. It looks really effortless. I talked to him off the record about it in the locker room, and I asked him, like, is that just something you can do because you're stupid strong, that is not necessarily advisable for other guys? And the answer was basically yes, he can kind of get away with that, and that allows him to not overcommit to the outside, give up the interior rushing lane. So that's a superpower that a guy like him with that strength has. You talk about the left side of the line, moving to Skoronski, also a strong showing. Looked like the most polished line. Again, 14 snaps, so whatever. Looked like the most polished guy out there, which is what I would expect from him. Him and Cushenberry look like veterans, which they are, but Skoronski coming into his second year ahead of his time, in my opinion. A lot of good reps for him. That's really all I have to contribute on him. Were you equally impressed with Skoronski last night?
Yeah, I mean, Skoronski, and I guess you can kind of group Cushenberry into there as well. I think it's not nothing that the communication was on par with their new starting center. No penalties given up in those first two drives. I think that's what you want to see, especially trying to get back into the swing of things. Seeing them both drives not have any penalties is what you want to see from them. I was pretty content with both what Skoronski and Cushenberry did. And then I think the biggest one of the night is the right side and how strong it looked between NPF.
Now,
and
hang on.
Dylan
Do
Radin.
not paper over Wood Cushenberry. You said 3 sections of the line. The center. It's just equal thoughts on him. Solid. No notes.
Well, yeah, no.
That's where I am. But I want to give him his due.
My 3 sections were JC, and then Peter and Cushenberry, and then the right side is how I was going to. How I was.
Weird way. Who taught you how to split up an offensive line? Left, right, center. All right, whatever. The point is,
because I didn't really have anything to say on Skoronski.
No, I didn't either. I just wanted to make
sure
you weren't forgetting him. Okay, so Cushenberry, Skoronski, solid, no notes. Moving on to the right side of the line. Go ahead. I don't want to cut you off. You had thoughts. Go for it.
Yeah, I thought it looked very, very strong. I thought MPF came out and looked like the guy, which I think we all knew was eventually going to happen. But then it really didn't look like Dylan Radins was a liability out there. And of course, 14 snaps. We know we've seen Dylan Radins a lot play a full game, but that kind of being able to anchor between like Cushenberry in a new look NPF, just kind of that strong anchor on the right side, I think is going to kind of help him out in the long run. I've kind of talked about how I think this is the offensive line we'll see starting week 1 from left to right. And so being able to see them look strong out there, I think will probably give the, as Coach Callahan says right there, his father always is expecting more of these guys. But I think this kind of gives the confidence for Bill Callahan to go ahead and say, this is the starting line. Let's start getting these guys really connected and have a lot of chemistry, and then, go from there and continue to build on this.
I think you're underselling it on MPF. You say he looks like the guy which we expected. We expected him to win the job, but many did not expect him to look good. And again, 1,000,000 times, 14 snaps. Let's see more. But in those 14 snaps last night, as our buddy Stoney said it, and he's my best friend that I trust on actual offensive line analysis that's like in depth, because if you think you're a good O-line analyst, the answer is you're probably not. You should probably talk to somebody that really knows what they're talking about, and Stoney knows what he's talking about. And he said on Twitter last night, man, I get it. I see the vision. And that confirms what I saw as well. So like I am there on MPF. Again, 14 snaps. But if he can do what he did in that 2-drive sample size on a somewhat consistent basis, you've got a starting right tackle. And that's a really big thing. We talked all offseason about, hey, oh man, you get JC Latham in there. He's going to be a stalwart tackle for you. And sure, he came into the offseason really needing 2 tackles. You probably don't have another one. But if you just have one in the NFL, you can get by with just having one. You can make that work. But brother, if you find 2, it opens up a whole new world of opportunities for you, a whole new world of possibilities. If you have 2 real quality, average or better starting tackles on your team, that is so massive for your offense. And so I'm going to lump Radins personally into that category of the interior guys. Not a ton of notes from me. I want to see more snaps. Certainly not negative. Good job, lads. Hey, MPF, you impressed me. You impressed me really since you've been back to practice the past week or so. Keep this up, and I think it is going to quickly change people's opinions of how this offensive line looks going into the season. Moving on to the next topic, and I do now have the order of today in front of me, which as the host, I probably should have done to begin the show, but just ignore all the things I said before this. I was wrong. Next up, definitively on the list, is the running back situation. We saw Tony Pollard, we saw Tyjae Spears out there last night together for the first time as a tandem in a game. And we asked Brian Callahan, you asked Brian Callahan at the presser today, whether or not the situation with those two is dependent on the specific play, the situation in the game. How do you know who's going in for what? And Brian, this is not in the clip, right? What is the clip you have for us? Is it that
This
question?
is Brian Callahan's
well, then
response.
let Brian explain it. Let's hear it from Brian.
Tagged, especially in the preseason, this early part, and we knew we were only going to get a handful of plays. So I was very intentional about tagging them on the plays I wanted to get them in on. So they rotated pretty clean, and they knew what plays they were going to be in for in that first set of plays. So that was intentional. It'll be some version of that in the regular season as well. We're just making sure that we put them on the plays that they feel great about. I'm not going to say it's going to rotate every other play or anything like that. It kind of felt like that early on, but yeah, we'll tag those guys on most plays when we want those guys in the game, and we'll be more intentional too about where we put the other receivers as well. We're gonna have 5 to 6 guys up on game day, and those guys all have roles. They'll have plenty of different places. We'll tag those guys too. So that process is usually done during the course of the week, and on game day it's pretty well settled. Steve,
I think this line of questioning is really fascinating because it's starting to get to the root of the question we've all been asking since Tony Pollard joined this team, which is, how do you differentiate these two? Like, who does what? Do they do the same thing? Are they going to be used in the same way? Is one going to be more a receiving back, one more a rusher? Is one going to be more a third down guy or an inline or in the backfield chipper blocker guy? Is one going to be a between the tackles guy? One's going to be more your like what? How do we differentiate between these two guys, or are they just carbon copies of the same style of runner? And so far the answer has been they're kind of the same. Good luck if you're in fantasy, especially good luck. But the deployment, the play calling deployment, as Brian Callahan says here, they're going to do some version during the season of going into the game knowing if it's this play call, this guy's in. If it's this play call, this guy's in. In order to do that during the week, to game plan for, hey, we're going to give Tyjae his list of plays, we're going to give Tony his list of plays. Unless it's just arbitrary and they flip a coin to say, this half goes to you and this half goes to you, there has to be something that the coaching staff sees in them to be like, okay, take this play. Hey, this favors Tony more because he does blank better. And we don't know what that is yet, but that's going to be the clues we start to get as we see them deployed in different ways as to how the coaching staff perceives their strengths and weaknesses. Now, I don't envy the coaching staff having to make that decision because, again, my eyes tell me from practice, it's really half a dozen of one and 6 of another, right? It is really, really similar, these two backs. And so I can't wait to ask more coaches and those two guys about how that's going to work during the season because, again, unless you're just flipping a coin, there has to be some reason why you go into the game knowing who's going to be in on what kind of play.
Chef Rand in the comments here says Pollard does have, he has some power. And I think that's one of the differentiating factors there. I think Pollard, possesses that more ability to run downfield a lot better than Tyjae.
Did you see that 50-yard run he broke off last night? It was impressive.
It was very impressive.
All 50 yards.
I'm not going to comment on that. However,
okay.
I think that one of the possibilities of it, and it's one that is going to be frustrating because we talk about at least for real football it makes sense. For fantasy it probably doesn't at all, and it's going to be frustrating. Is the way they probably use them in pass protection. I wonder if that's maybe a way that they kind of divvy it up between the two, which everyone in we were talking about this last night in fantasy land is going to be like, okay, so they're both going to get their touches, but at the same time, you never know who's going to have the big week between the two. Like there's just not going to be a way to tell because if it truly is based on, this guy does this a little bit differently, but they're pretty similar. And we're going to go based off kind of the pass protection and what we need from each player. There's going to be no possible way to tell which guy is going to get the goal line touches, which guy is going to go off for the big runs. Like that's just not going to be able to be discerned in this offense. And so that is what I was tracking last night and kind of confirms what we knew all along, that there is no 1 and 2. This is a 1A, 1 something in between A and B.
Also
like,
A. 1A,
also
1A.
kind of offense. And I think that's how it's going to be rolled out this year. I do want to point out something that listening back to this question and hearing Callahan's answer again, that just kind of perked up. The fact that he said we'll deploy the wide receivers in a certain way when we have the 5 to 6 wide receivers up on game day, which I think changes the math for a discussion we can have later. I thought that was just interesting to point out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. So again, this is the winners and losers segment. They're both winners. We've not gotten to any real losers yet besides the starting defense looking kind of funky. Now, I've been teasing it on accident all show. T'Vondre Sweat, a brief word on him and a clip to run for also Brian Callahan, right? This is Brian Callahan talking about him, this next clip. Okay, so Brian Callahan was asked about T'Vondre Sweat in his debut as a player, and I think he sums it up well. Let's hear from him real quick.
He get improved, and so that part was good for him. It was a good learning experience for him. But he still felt him. He still took up double teams. He still was disrupted the line of scrimmage. He can hold a point of attack, and that was all good things to see. So positive first starts, playing cleanup for him as well. Questions?
I thought it was perfectly fine what we saw from him. I only want to address it insofar as a number of fans seemed disappointed because it was much ballyhooed, the debut of T'Vondre Sweat. What's he going to do out there? Just 12 snaps. As Brian Callahan said in the question, I think we cut off a little bit. Not really any splash plays, but, doubled on 5 of the 12 snaps, nervous, kind of settling in by the end of his run, and then they pull him out of there, and he's watching the rest of the game from the sideline. So I don't want fans to see last night's performance as discouraging, because it wasn't. He was perfectly fine in there, and he was battling against some good Niners, Dominic Pooney, who draft Knicks will recognize that name. Really good Kansas player, right? Kansas interior player.
Correct. Yep.
He's likely to be the starting guard for the Niners because he is looking good in a hurry. And so that is no scrub that T'Vondre Sweat was playing up against for most of the night. I thought he was perfectly fine, and I'm looking forward to seeing more from him.
Yeah. I think when you saw him on those double teams too, though, the ability for him to still move guys in those double teams, even though he wasn't breaking through on the plays, he was taking those linemen out of the entire play, which, like you alluded to, I think we were talking about this. It was probably unlikely to see, a lot come out of that because, once again, Jeffrey Simmons was not there. But seeing him do his part to then potentially eventually see Jeffrey Simmons get that one-on-one is, I think, the goal that we are going towards. So I was fine with his his play. Obviously it's your first game, it's nervous. We talked about questions of maybe can he stay in there for 5 to 6 snaps. He was able to do that just fine. There was no concern whatsoever. So I was pretty content once again with his day as well.
Just give us more. It's TBD till we see more. And listen, this week during joint practices, we're going to get more of him. So I'm looking forward to that. Moving on. And by the way, speaking of questions, those of you in the comments that are leaving your questions for us, we are not ignoring them. We've got them starred. We've got them locked in. We're going to address them all by the end of the show. Don't worry. Don't touch that dial. We'll get to your thoughts in a minute. The next conversation that we need to have is the tight end situation. And while you mentioned the running backs, there's 2 positions on this team where the first unofficial depth chart comes out and you've got a 1A, 1B co-starting situation. It's the 2 running backs and the 2 starting tight ends, where the running backs we think at this point are 1A, 1A. The tight ends are 1A, 1B insofar as they are playing different roles. And last night kind of confirmed what we thought was going to be the case. In this new offense, the tight end room is clearly split between who's running Y and who's running F. And JT, we're going to play your question that you asked Brian Callahan about this in just a minute today. But last night you had as the Y, which again is the more inline blocking, traditional up the seam tight end. That was Josh Wiley leading the group. And then Nick Vanette is going to be playing that role. Thomas Odukoya and Steven Stylianos. And then the Fs, the guys that are going to be more that fullback role, that move role. Think back to this is the same F that Brian Callahan was talking about in his long answer to me the other day in that sit down about a week ago. That role is going to be more Chika Okonkwo, and DMR, David Martin Robinson. And so you asked Brian Callahan today, hey, if you keep just 3 tight ends on this roster, can guys switch? Like, can Chigakonkwo play Y sometimes, play F sometimes? Is there versatility there? Here's what he had to say.
They're kind of upcoming, and I think we got guys that are versatile enough to play in both spots. Again, it's always that 4th tight end is going to be a special teams role at the end of the day. Are they really contributing on special teams and really helping that as a four-phase starter? But I think I was pleasantly surprised. I thought DMR did a really nice job in the game. I thought Thomas did some good things. I think that room has really come along. I think they've really grown, and even Steven did a nice job in the game as well. I just hadn't seen him play much live action, and he even did some good things. So they're all competing. They're doing a really good job. We got versatile guys that can play Y and F for us. And again, it's just going to be a matter of, what does the 4th tight end do in the 3rd phase of the game.
Not really any comment from me on Josh Wiley and Chigakonkwo last night because we saw so little of them. No issue, like neither positive nor negative. I do agree with Brian that David Martin Robinson, impressive last night. And if anybody is making the case based on that game, based on practice so far, for them to keep a 4th tight end, which Brian just clarified, if they do, it's going to be a guy that plays a big role on special teams. It's a luxury position if they were to keep that guy. It's David Martin Robinson. He's the one making that case because he is a viable piece on offense. They got him in there and he laid some nasty blocks in particular in the blocking capacity, lined up as that fullback, laying a really fantastic block. The one in particular that comes to mind was for a Hassan Haskins run in the red zone. He flew into the box and laid a nasty hit that got 4 or 5 yards. Otherwise, it would have probably been a tackle for loss. That's the kind of thing that endears you to the coaches and earns you a spot on the roster where we previously thought you may not have one. Because we know Josh Wiley, we know Chigakonkwo, and we pretty much know Nick Van Etten are going to be your tight ends on this team. David Martin Robinson making the case to be a 4th.
Yeah, and that's kind of where it's going. When we get down to it in roster cut down day, and if they end up only keeping 3, I think that's telling that they probably will start interchanging maybe Nick Van Etten and Chig as that Y and F. But if they do keep a 4th, I think that might be even more telling to say that Chig may just end up finding himself playing a lot of the F role in this offense, and maybe keeping those 4, 2F, 2Y, there's not going to be that much interchanging. And I think when we get down to that roster cut down day, that's going to be a big talking point on the roster.
And so this brings us to the last position group on offense we've not touched on, and that's wide receiver. An interesting one, and the number one overall thought I have from this game is I fear the white slot receivers are cooked. I think that if you're Mason Kinsey, if you're Kyle Phillips, things got tough for you last night. Not necessarily by anything that you did wrong, but because one Mr. Kieris Jackson and one Mr. Jaquan Jackson, they had really impressive games. And those 2 were your starting returners. They were the 2 lined up deep on the new kickoff rule. Kieris Jackson, currently unless something happened today that I'm not aware of, currently the holder of the most successful, longest return in the dynamic kick. What was it? Is dynamic? Is that the word? Or what's the word for the new kickoff? Whatever it is. I think it's dynamic. The dynamic kickoff era, whatever the new kickoff is, he currently owns the longest one so far. That was a really impressive return. And you saw that, I think, if you were in the stadium and knew about this wide receiver sweepstakes at the bottom, these 4 guys kind of fighting for one spot, you perked up and said, that's the kind of thing that can get you on a roster. Jaquan Jackson kind of answered the call later in the game, a punt return where he's really shifty, really slippery, nearly houses it, equally impressive and long in setting up the offense in plus position. Those 2 got a good long look as returners last night. And as we said going into the game, JT, your special teams prowess, in particular your returning prowess, is probably going to be the defining thing, the tiebreaker when it comes to which of these smaller slot shifty guys ends up making the final roster.
Yeah, and so I think you can, say based on what we heard earlier from Brian Callahan, where they said they're only maybe going to keep 5 to 6 guys come game day. Well, you have your 5, so that really means that 4 guys are coming down to one spot. And right now, it's got to be a guy that's contributing a lot on special teams, and that's between Kieris Jackson and Jaquan Jackson. I think both of them are more than capable The problem is we saw more. I think the difference between them, we saw a lot better kick return ability from Kieris Jackson and a lot better punt return and punt recognition, when to catch it, when to leave it recognition, like the ability there from Jaquan Jackson. And so those are two very different things that you need from your special teams wide receiver to kind of do both. So then it's going to be a really interesting conversation to have and an observation to watch as we get more and more into these preseason games. That's one of the things I definitely be watching for, both in practice and also in the games. I think the one thing, that Brian Callahan did say today about that position is that he kind of talked about how they were going to be mixing them in. He says today that he thinks he will continue to get them mixed in the next two games. Kyle Phillips and Mason Kinsey will probably get some action there to see what they have. But he said the point of emphasis today was to really see Kieris Jackson and Jaquan Jackson, and that's why they gave them all of the reps in that game. I do wonder, however, though, if we see Mason Kinsey or Kyle Phillips have some of the same results in the next two games. I wonder if that puts them back into the equation, because when you look at them, Jaquan Jackson and Kieris Jackson probably are the better special team returners. But if Mason Kinsey and Kyle Phillips can give you almost the same thing and also probably contribute better as that backup slot receiver than the Kieris Jackson or Jaquan Jackson can, does that kind of put them over the top? And I wonder if that's kind of where the discussion is going to come down to.
And that's perfectly fair. And as Chef Ram points out in the comments, their race does not matter. No, obviously it does not. I'm being facetious. But the element of return ability that is your smarts, your reliableness, like, am I worried about you catching the ball? Am I worried about you fielding a punt at the 3 and getting pummeled and setting us up in bad position? I say those two things not just in general, but in particular to point out Kyle Phillips has a history of doing these things. You think back to the London game last year, right before halftime, choosing to field that punt in the short area, fumbling, giving the Ravens a free field goal before half. Obviously, the fumble issues in the past. I tweeted before the game, apropos of nothing, I just watched Kyle Phillips drop consecutive warm-up punt catches, punt receptions. So, fielding punts, still a struggle for a guy like Kyle Phillips, I'm afraid. I think it's just yips. It's got to be mental. I don't understand otherwise what exactly it would be. But yeah, I think, well, first of all, I think it's down to these 4 guys are fighting for at most one spot. When you hear Brian Callahan today talk about 5 or 6 receivers on the active roster, we know DeAndre Hopkins may come into the year hurt, but he's not going to be on any exemption designation. Like, he's not going to be on PUP. He's not going to be on IR. He's going to be an active roster guy that's just a game day scratch, but it's taken up a 53-man roster spot. So you're not going to have, I don't think, a 7th receiver on this team. I flirted with that in the past. That comment from Brian gives me a look into his head and says, no, maybe one of these guys makes the roster, and it's probably the one that's going to be doing the returning. Our buddy Zach pointed out, by the way, you don't have to rely on these guys to be the returners. Tyjae Spears, like, he still exists. We talked about this on the show the other day. Not crazy about using him as a returner because I think he's too valuable a player to risk in that way, but technically a possibility, and they may choose to go that route.
Traylon Burks as well. We didn't see him out there, but he's been doing it as well. So,
well, hey, can I mention, by the way, to wrap up on the wide receiver comments, Calvin Ridley made a cool catch and did a Calvin Ridley thing. People seem to be surprised by that on the internet. I don't know why. I was not. Like, he just did out there what we've been seeing him do throughout practice. He's like, we're high on Calvin. I'm high personally on Calvin Ridley on this show. I think that he is a do-it-all receiver. People ask me, do you think Calvin Ridley is going to be their go-deep guy this year? Hey, is he going to be their yards after the catch guy this year? Hey, is he going to be the security blanket guy for Will Levis? He's going to be a high-volume guy this year? And my answer to these people is, I think he should do a little bit of everything guy this year. I don't see an element of his game where if he's deployed correctly and creatively, which I trust Brian Callahan to do, I don't see any weakness. Like, I think that he's a complete receiver. And maybe it's his age. Maybe it's his proclivity to potentially get hurt. But I don't see a drop-off in speed. I don't see a drop-off in shiftiness. I think he's the best route runner on the team. I think that he has a gear that most guys on the team don't have. I think he can line up everywhere. He's a really smart, cerebral player. He's a wily vet that knows exactly what he needs to be doing. I love everything about him. So thumbs up on that. The last guy I want to mention is Traylon Burks, who had one catch and run last night where he ran over a dude. We've got a Traylon Burke truck alert, something I feels like we've not had since he was wearing red in college as a Razorback. My genuine reaction to that play, and if you watch the game, you know what I'm talking about, because it probably made you sit up and say, have we ever seen Traylon Burks run that hard before? Like, is that the hardest I've seen him run with the football in his hands? That's the Traylon Burks I felt like I was signing up for when they drafted him, and he's been MIA, and that's been a big cause for concern with him. Is like, hey, where's this big, fast, physical, strong dude that runs guys over? He did it last night for one play, and he got up smiling about it, and we've seen a different energy from him. And again, it's 14 plays. Let's see more. But if that is a precursor for what he's going to be this year, that's exciting.
Yeah, I agree on those two guys. They looked capable and competent, in the absence of DeAndre Hopkins. It wasn't looking like they were pretty lost out there and missing the security blanket of DeAndre Hopkins for Will Levis. I thought they were executing as they should. Brian Callahan also noted this morning that he did want to, get Tyler Boyd a little bit more involved than he could have, but ultimately, because of how good Kearis Jackson returned that first kick, it just wasn't in the cards for him. But, they were trying to get all three of those guys involved, and it was good to see Calvin get a look, Traylon get a look, and, some of the other running backs get in the passing game as well. So that was really nice to see.
All right, let's move to the defensive side of the ball, and I want to knock these position groups out in descending order from least to most important in terms of what we have to say. The group I really have nothing to say about is the safeties, because you were missing a lot of the guys that we want to see. We heard from Brian Callahan today that a guy like Quandre Diggs likely to get back to a full workload out there. I don't expect him to be somebody that gets a lot of preseason snaps, but in practice and joint practice against his old team, I think we're going to see him out there. I think we'll see Jamal Adams if he is healthy and ready to go, which TBD on that, but I'd imagine he wants to get out there and throw the pads around against his former team. So that's a TBD thing. Did you have any safety thoughts from last night? I really did not.
I didn't either. There was, some talk with Brian Callahan this morning about how many they would keep now with so much depth. Brian Callahan flirted the possibility of keeping 5, but that was something that he didn't sound too enthusiastic about, considering with Elijah Molden, Amani Hooker, Jamal Adams, and Quandre Diggs now in the mix. That doesn't seem like there's going to be room for, another guy to step up. So not much to say from there on, honestly. Seeing Amani Hooker out there was nice. Seeing Elijah Molden out there was nice. But the other two guys are going to play the biggest factor into the evaluation of the safety group, I feel like.
Okay, next is defensive line. The front, the interior. I'll start interior. Besides T'Vondre Sweat, I didn't have many takeaways besides the fact that in the second half, garbage time, preseason sicko time, you saw a good bit of Keandre Coburn, who I think has been a positive force out there in practice. He reinforced that last night. I think that he's making a case for himself as a bottom of the roster defensive tackle. I spoke to him last week for an interview that I believe Justin Mello is going to put up on Broadway Sports Media this week. It's worth a listen. He's a cool guy to talk to. So I became a fan of his when I had that conversation, and I think that his play warrants a spot on the roster. There was a Quentin Bohanna sighting at one point. Other than that, your interior defensive line, it remains the case that you need Jeff and you need T'Vondre to 1, work, and 2, stay healthy, and then things will be fine. If either of those requirements aren't met, things could get hairy.
Yeah, I think when you talk about guys who raised their stock last night with their performance, Keandre Coburn is the first one that comes to mind. Sharing that sack with Khalid Duke as Josh Dobbs tries to roll out left and try to make a play. The fact that Keandre Coburn is a big dude. Like, he is one of the biggest defensive tackles on this
He's
team.
One of the only people on this team who can stand next to T'Vondre Sweat and look like he belongs. That's the best way to put it, I think.
I would agree with that sentiment there. But his ability to stay and get after Josh Dobbs as he's trying to make extend the play for another 3 to 4 seconds and then finally come down with the sack, I think is something that I wasn't expecting from a Keandre Coburn, being able to keep that stamina up like that. He's kind of like a T'Vondre Sweat light in the sense that he is that just big big bodied guy that's going to stuff runs and be able to move the pocket, not as well as Tavondre, but give the offensive line a handful to where they're going to have to double team him at some points. So like you said, I have seen a lot from him over the past couple of weeks and wouldn't be surprised if he ends up taking that last defensive line spot.
Okay, now moving to the exterior of the defensive line, the perimeter guys. At edge, we did not see any Harold. We saw a bit of Arden Key, but that's really neither here nor there because he's going to be suspended. I thought Jalen Harrell acquitted himself pretty well based on the expectations that were set for him coming into the game. Made a couple of strong plays. You mentioned a moment ago, Khalid Duke had a nice play in there. Other than that, Rashad Weaver didn't really show me anything. If anything, I'd say he's maybe a little bit of a stock down after this, just in the sense that, man, I think the ceiling on him is really limited. I don't know what else you're going to get from him. Shane Ray, I'm not going to lie, I didn't notice Shane. Did he even play? You could tell me he didn't play, I'd believe you. I didn't notice him one second.
I have no idea. Actually, I can go check that real quick.
Okay, well, the point is, didn't do anything last night to really pop off the screen because we both were watching with an eagle eye and did not notice Shane Ray out there. Caleb Murphy had a nice play. Thomas Rush also kind of invisible. The edge position was
he did play. He was in the game and he wasn't listed under the did not play. So
okay, all right, we'll have to check.
But like you said, I don't remember seeing him out there really much at all.
Right. So I think that's our thoughts on the edge guys. And now we can get to the two positions that actually matter here to this conversation and the things that stood out in this game. And that's cornerback and linebackers. Linebackers is a big one. So let's do cornerback. We saw, because you had no Owuzie, you had no Snead, we saw a good chunk of the depth guys. We got to see Jarvis Brownlee Jr. in a good chunk of action. We got to see Gabe Judy Lawley in a decent chunk of action. Trey Avery, of course, we saw. I'll start with Trey Avery. Trey Avery is the most capped guy on this roster in terms of further achievable upside. Like, most guys on this roster still have another gear that could theoretically be unlocked because of their athleticism or their youth or whatever it is. With Trey Avery, like, he is what he is at this point, man. There's no nice way of saying it. Throughout camp so far, the motto for quarterbacks in the offense has been, when in doubt, when you need a pick-me-up, target Trey Avery. And then last night, the 49ers backups seemed to pick up on that sentiment and said, when in doubt, hey, 3rd and 10, we're backed up in the end zone. Let's target Trey Avery. And that's really frustrating as a Titans fan. Does he make the roster because he's a veteran and because he's a body that will be able to be out there and like he's reliable to be able to play? Maybe as your cornerback 4, 5, 6. But do you want him to be your option? You really don't. On the other side of the coin, you have Jarvis Brownlee Jr., who looked quite nice last night. And he had an impressive PBU early on in the game. That was the defining moment for him, in my opinion. He's just out there balling, man. He is feisty. He's physical. He continues to look the part from what we fell in love with at the Senior Bowl. I think Jarvis Brownlee Jr., I'm at the point where I'm comfortable saying he is firmly your cornerback 4 on this team. I don't think anybody else is touching him for that primary number 1 backup, maybe rotational player on this team.
I agree with you. And I think I echo all your sentiments. Death, taxes, and Trey Avery getting cooked in coverage. Those are the inevitabilities in life. It does bring up a question, like, so you have your 4 cornerbacks, right? Like you said, they're pretty set in stone right now. And L'Jarius Sneed, Chidobe Awuzie, and Roger McCreary. And then, like you said, Jarvis Brownlee Jr. has been pretty solidly solidifying himself into that cornerback 4.
Solidly solidifying, you say?
Yes. I agree. Same word, alliteration is what I'm going with there. But then it brings up, you need more than 4. And your options right now, realistically, are Trey Avery, Shyheim Carter, and Gabe Judy Lawley, who both Shyheim Carter and Gabe Judy Lawley in the 4th quarter were a big reason why, even though it doesn't really matter, but Josh Dobbs was able to dice down the field and give the 49ers even a chance to win that game last night. I mean, they were targeting every wide receiver that was on either Shyheim Carter or Gabe Judy Lawley was pretty decently open in coverage. And so that begs the question, like, I don't know if I would trust any of those three to even be the cornerback 5 on this team right now.
No, and the guy I forgot to mention, who I think Titans fans should be hopeful because there is still ceiling that is achievable with this guy, and he is a raw prospect, is Gabe Jeudy-Lally. I didn't mention him a moment ago because I kind of forgot about him because in this game, he was forgettable. He had a couple of plays that were, let me put it this way. I was disappointed chiefly in the two losers at the quarterback position for me last night were Gabe Jeudy-Lally and Trey Avery. With Trey Avery, he was a loser, expected, and with Gabe Jeudy-Lally, he was a loser, unexpected, disappointing. I was hoping to see more from him so far in camp. We were intrigued and fell in love with his upside during OTAs in the spring. We put the pads on, and it's been a learning curve for him. Now, I think patience is necessary here because he is a UDFA guy. He's somebody that is very young. They're very raw as a player is maybe the way I should put it instead of age. If he turns into something, if he becomes your cornerback 5 eventually on this team, it's not yet. And so there's development needed there. And I think the bottom line here is you have 4 cornerbacks on this team that you can trust, and then things get hairy. So you better hope those guys stay healthy.
Yeah, I think the 5th actually could be right now. It's just Eric Garror, and then they just figure it out afterwards.
Yeah, but Eric Garror falls into, and Eric Garror bothers me less than Trey Avery does, but he also plays a different role. And like Trey Avery being on the outside, he's more liable to get just straight up scorched down the sideline.
Right.
With Eric Garror, he'll get scorched in the short area, and the safeties over the top will bail him out. So it's different, but there's still some of that. We know what you are, Eric Garror. We don't love the idea of having you out there in a pinch. Sure, but am I confident in Eric Garror as making this team as your cornerback 5 or 6? Like take it or leave it. That's kind of where I'm at. So that's the cornerbacks. Last but not least, the linebackers. And perhaps we saved the best for last because the linebacker situation last night, illuminating, JT. You mentioned earlier in the show, we were talking about the starting defense. The starting linebackers in particular, Kenneth Murray, Jack Gibbons, left a ton to be desired in their limited play. And then you got the second team guys out there. And dare I say, Chance Campbell and Otis Reese just flat out looked better than the 2 starters. That's honestly my top line headline takeaway is, are we certain that, and again, it's one preseason game. Let's not go crazy. Are we certain that there's a big difference between Kenneth Murray and Jack Gibbons combo and a Chance Campbell Otis Reese combo? I'm not ready to say that.
I think that we can also have the same conversation of like what is it, the chicken or the egg here, right? Because Chance
Is
Campbell
one good or are they both bad? Is that what you're saying?
It's more in the vein of, is Chance Campbell and Otis Reese just playing above expected and looking very, very good out there? Or is it because we started to see Denard kind of unleash some of that blitz and pressure packages that we didn't see available with Kenneth Murray and Jack Gibbons?
That is fair. That is fair.
We saw a lot of that later in the game, and Denard kind of scheming up looks, especially with a guy that we'll also mention here in a second, James Williams, where they were able to start blitzing and get home. So like you said, it's a conversation that I'm willing to entertain. I'm more willing to entertain the fact that it may very well be like a Kenneth Murray and then one of 3 in Jack Gibbons, Otis Reese, or Chance Campbell. I think Kenneth Murray is solidly in that linebacker spot. It's the other 2 or the other linebacker spot where those 3 are fighting for it, or I guess 4 considering James Williams, that, I think that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad you checked me on that because that is fair. If I look back on what I just said and feel stupid about it in a week and 2 weeks and a month, it's going to be because of that it was weird and they didn't really cut them loose. They didn't utilize them in the way that they're going to actually be utilized when the games start to matter. And so it made the guys that did get to be cut loose and get in there look better. That being said, a guy like Otis Reese in particular has always stuck out to me. And we've kind of been on, this has been a long-term narrative. I've always felt like he's a guy, like you watch the limited tape from him in the past and you kind of come away with, he may be your best overall, all-around linebacker between him and Campbell and Jack Gibbons, but the team has consistently, old regime and new regime, preferred a Jack Gibbons to Otis Reese. I've never quite understood why he's so far down on the depth chart with recent injuries to guys. Jojo Doman and Garrett Wallow, Cedric Gray. He's kind of bumped up, and so we saw more of him last night than maybe you otherwise would have. But I am still intrigued by him. I am intrigued. By the way, James, we got a clip to play. I don't know whether or not it's in this clip, but Brian Callahan talking about the linebackers, he mentions rookie James Williams, who's a converted safety into a linebacker. Some high praise for him. Let's hear what Brian had to say.
Excited about those guys. I think it was a great outing for Chance. You saw his confidence kind of start to bloom, and that's a good thing. He played loose and fast and aggressive, all the things we want to see from those guys. Otis did as well. I mean, those guys both had a really nice game, I thought. They're getting opportunities, and so when you get opportunities, you got to make the most of them. And I think to their credit, they have. And James, I don't think James even knows how good he could be yet. He's still learning the position as a converted safety, but he's got some things that he flashes that are really impressive. And so there's some battles going on back in that back of the linebacker room, and they're taking advantage. All of them have taken advantage of increased opportunity because of the injuries that have occurred, and I'm really happy that they have.
That's a big endorsement of a rookie in James Williams, and maybe that's just a coach pumping up his guy. I'm not saying that that's out of the realm of possibility, but that sounds like a head coach talking about a guy who he thinks is a long play for them, when we get this guy figured out, y'all are going to see this guy's got the goods. We've just got to mold. We got to take this lump of clay and mold it into something special. But yeah, that's kind of my takeaway is I think this linebacking room, far from set, far from determined, and maybe most importantly, far from a thing that you can go into the season and comfortable about. We had gotten sort of to a point there where we were like, hey, man, Kenneth Murray looking pretty good so far. Maybe they know something we don't. Hey, Jack Gibbons making some plays in camp. Maybe he's improved. And then last night, again, for the millionth time, limited sample size, I felt like we came back down to earth. Like, there's the guys I kind of thought we would see in the beginning. I hope that that's not the case, but it is a sobering reality.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so that is a very loosely defined version of winners and losers. This gets easier when we get to the actual games, to be honest with you, because we see actual guys play for the full length of the game, and they're more
when you're not locked in my basement because I
that's right
be on time. Yes.
When I have a second screen and my notes and all, I'm not just going based off of a card. Yeah, that's better. So we'll get back to that, I'm sure, with next week's edition. Always improving. That's the key around here. One last segment for you before we get out of here. Producer JT has got some news for us. So let's get to the news with producer JT. JT, what do we have on the docket today?
Yeah, let's first talk about Brian Callahan's kind of address to us this morning, talking about how the guys who were injured yesterday fared and giving an update on them. The biggest one who went down with injury early in the game was Luke Gifford, who Brian Callahan confirmed suffered a concussion. No word on or timetable on how severe / long he will be out, but he made a really nice play, a really hard hit on that first kickoff return attempt there by the 49ers. Came up, was super hyped about it, and then we really didn't see him again. So got, I guess, banged up pretty good on that one. And then, Brian Callahan also telling us today that both Quandre Diggs, he expects to get back in the fold, as well as Jamal Adams back this week with the Seahawks joint practices. And then also he said that possibly Leroy Watson would be able to make his return this week. So good things there for those guys. Obviously a tough break for Luke Gifford, but still unsure of the timetable there.
My only Luke Gifford thought is that I think this guy shouldn't be on the team when they get to the 53. He's due a significant north of $1 million. That's some money they can save. They're probably going to cut him. So tough break for him. I'm not trying to rub it in his face, kick him while he's down by any means. But the reason I bring that up is because he's the kind of special teams ace, as he was billed last season when the Titans signed him, that you fear as a fan will make the team just because of that special teams prowess. I don't really want any more of those guys on this team. I've gotten burnt on that the past couple of years, where it's just like, I see these guys you bring in as special teams aces, and then I don't see the acery. Where's the acery out there on special teams? Like, are you really worth the money? I don't think so. You're not contributing anywhere besides special teams. Let's move on. So that's him. And
then we can talk about the Titans joint practices this week. They will practice on Wednesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. on both of those days, with Seattle a little bit later practice than normal. He noted that it would be a lot hotter for those practices this upcoming week, but kind of just with the schedule of Seattle being on Pacific time, giving them a little bit more time to adjust. I do have a clip here about Brian Callahans' thoughts on going into the week with Seattle Seahawks joint practices. Here's what he had to say.
I mean, I'd like to get it's going to be it's supposed to be hot. We're practicing a little bit later because they're on West Coast time, so we're trying to accommodate the schedule. It's going to be hotter. It's going to be more physical because you're playing against somebody else. So I'm hoping for two great days of controlled physical work against them. And that will likely lead to some of the starters playing less in this game just because of the amount of work they're going to get in practice. So I'll officially give you some more playtime information at the end of the week, but I think that the starting point is going to be to play just probably a little bit less, if at all, depending on how the two practices go against Seattle. So just because it's going to be such a heavy load on those guys, and emphasis will be for the ones to get a lot more reps and the 2s and 3s to play a lot more in the game. So.
Over under joint practice fights. Where's the international book of JT placing that line?
I'm going 1.5, I think.
Low. I'm smashing the over on that. I would have set the line.
So?
I would have set the line at 3.5. I think 2 a day. You get some, maybe 3 day one. They calm down on day 2. Get you one more. So yeah, I expect it to be, as he said, hot and physical. And there's some bad blood, I think, between certain guys maybe not bad blood, but revenge against your team kind of deal with some of these guys.
Especially with Quandre and Jamal. Yes.
That is who I'm alluding to. Yes. So I think that's going to be, it's going to be a fun one to watch, and we'll be out there and covering it all week long. So what else in the news? Anything else?
That's going to do it for our news section of today. However, we do have a couple of comments to get to from
let's get through them all. What do we got?
Poiple Neupel in the comments here saying, dating back to last preseason, he thought Campbell was better than Gibby. I think that's a conversation we're going to have over the next couple of weeks, and it'll be interesting to see how that turns out at the end of training camp.
Agreed. I think that it is an open competition between most of these guys.
Joseph Lindsay also says in the comments here, Jalen Duncan needs to be third team. John Ojukwu is clearly better. I don't know if I agree with that. I liked what I saw from Jalen Duncan yesterday, and we talked to Brian Callahan this morning about the guys in the second and third team that he thought really showed up. He mentioned Daniel Brunskill, Andrew Rupsich, and Jalen Duncan. Those were the 3 guys he thought stood out. So I'm not quite sure. Like I said on Thursday's show, and I'm sorry to keep rubbing it in Stoney Keeley's face, but Ojukwu mania, I think, as he
Don't
said
send
him
him through the lobster tank again. He's already on enough lobsters harmed.
He himself said yesterday. He himself, Stoney, said yesterday, Ojukwu mania has been burnt alive to a crisp. And I think that's where the sentiment is right now with that. Your thoughts on the offensive lineman behind the first team?
Man, my thoughts are John Ojukwu and Jalen Duncan. Both are still really raw, and you should pray by your bedside every night as a Titans fan that you don't rely on either of them this season. That's what I feel like. I think they both are still very raw prospects. So there's that.
Jordan Lowry in the comments here saying, when are we going to talk about the nasty nut? Give the people what they want. I'll let you go on here because I really have nothing to say of note.
Yeah, just one quick thought on the nasty nut. Fantastic preseason running back. Of course, we're talking about Titans legend Julius Chestnut. He was out there last night doing his thing in the preseason, a couple of big runs, and I'm glad that you, Jordan, used the appropriate nicknameage here for Julius Chestnut, who continues to impress and fight for that third running back spot.
And then finally, a longer question here, but I think this is an interesting one. Alex Titans asks, can I ask an honest question? I understand the thought process of keeping our quarterback safe, but how many quarterbacks actually get hurt while running the ball? I feel like 95% of quarterback injuries are in the pocket, and the other 5% are quarterbacks running and sliding late, Bridgewater, Flacco, etc. The guys who embrace the hits never get injured.
I know there is a recent study on this. I don't know if it was PFF or Sumer Sports. Somebody did a thing on this. I saw it. I think I bookmarked it. Let me go find it, and if I do, I'll tweet about it. I get where you're coming from, and I think at worst it is an even split. Like from what I understand, you are no more liable to become injured when you take off running as a quarterback than if you stay in the pocket and stand under that pressure for too long and take maybe an unsuspecting hit from the blind side or whatever it may be. So there is something to that, and I think people overrate. Oh, he's running, he's going to get hurt. He's just being out there. They're liable to get hurt.
And then our final comment for today, Wyatt asks, did EF chat with the giveaway winner, which we can talk about finally now on the show?
Yeah, so our boy Jesse Owens, Quentin Bohanna, what was his name? No, Jesse Fletcher was with us last night. Jesse was awesome. I spent the third quarter up there, stole somebody's seat who didn't decide to show up to the game in the club level, and sat with JT and Jesse, and we watched and talked ball. Jesse was the nicest dude, the coolest guy. You're always worried a little bit with these giveaways, like who's the rando that's going to join us. Jesse was. If I could have handpicked Jesse and rigged the system, I would have, because Jesse was very cool, right up our alley. Thank you, Jesse, for coming out and hanging out and submitting and doing the thing to get in the giveaway. Speaking of giveaways, JT, we are running this giveaway back. We've got the exact same situation going this week. The terms of the giveaway, again, this is to join JT and I in the club level for the Seahawks game. We've got a free seat with your name on it. All you have to do is TBD. We'll decide what exactly the terms of this giveaway are this week. But make sure you are tuned in on Tuesday, because by Tuesday, we will know what the giveaway terms are. We will begin accepting entries to try to win that ticket. And as we pointed out last week, this is not a giveaway on, Sirius XM National, where you're up against 100,000 people and your odds are very low. No, your odds are quite good here on the local Hot Read podcast, to be quite frank with you. So if you want that ticket for free to come hang out with us and watch the game in the club level, make sure to tune in on the Tuesday episode where we'll be talking more about the Titans. JT, I think that's it. Anything else in the comments we need to get to?
That's going to do it for today.
I saw some folks acknowledging my 1,500-meter swim, which we don't have to get into today. But if you are curious about how that went down, it's on my Twitter. Me and Katie Ledecky both accomplished the near-mile swim. She did it slightly faster than I did, but that's neither here nor there. I am an elite Olympic caliber athlete. That was what was demonstrated there. So, no, that was not an encouragement for the worst amongst us to apply to come sit with us. That we only want guys like Jesse. That's the idea. Until Tuesday, where we announce the terms and conditions of that giveaway. Make sure you're liked and subscribed on Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page. Make sure you're following us at Hot Read Pod on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll talk to you on Tuesday.